Hey, my name is Haley. Welcome to my channel and welcome to another video. Today I am going to show you guys my September wrap up. All the books I read in September. I read a total of 13 books. I read 3 fiction, 3 nonfiction, 2 horror, 2 short story collections, 1 graphic novel, 1 fantasy, and 1 children's books. And just to give you an idea of the breakdown of the books I read 1 3-star book, 1 3.5-star book, 4 4-star books, 2 4.5-star books, and 5 5-star books. So it was actually like a really great month for reading. I read a really large variety of books, and I just felt like overall the books I read were really good. I think I'm going to start with the lowest rating to the highest rating, just to give you guys an idea of how much I liked the books that I read. So the first book, the book that got a 3-star review, was Malorie by Josh Malerman. I initially read Bird Box last year and I really loved it. I also really loved the movie. I thought it was really great. It was just a great thriller, just really kept me on edge. I love like the uncomfortableness of having reading about people whose senses are cut off. Like, I really love that about these books. But ultimately, Malorie just felt really rushed and really flat. Like Bird Box, I think it was quite long. It didn't feel very long because it was, I just ran through it really quickly. But Malorie was only like 200 something pages, maybe 300. And it just felt like it could have been longer and things could have been fleshed out, and it would have been a lot better of a book. It also didn't really have as much of a thriller aspect to it like Bird Box did. It felt more like a family drama. So this is taking place like 10 years after Bird Box, and Malorie's children have grown up and now they're being like typical teenagers. They're wanting to rebel. They don't like to follow her rules, but her rules are set in place to keep them alive. So there is that kind of like danger aspect to it. But ultimately, it was like in their heads as they reacted to each other. And so the fear of the creatures and the thrilling aspect of that was not present. I also just think parts of it were really unbelievable. Like I know we're supposed to suspend belief on this story entirely, what with the creatures and not being able to see them and stuff like that. But there were particular parts of it that I just thought, how? Like, for instance, like a character from Bird Box finds them in Malorie, and it's like, I just didn't really believe that part of it. And then there's also the idea of the train. This isn't not necessarily a spoiler, but there's what's called a blind train, and you can get on it and it will take you very slowly somewhere and everything's blocked out and you're able to just like trust in this system of transportation. I liked that aspect of it, but again, just didn't feel genuine. So overall, I enjoyed Malorie. I thought it was a good book. I liked the characters. I liked being back in that world. But when comparing it to Bird Box, it just does not compare. The next one I read, which got a 3.5-star for me, was a short story collection. It's called Will You Please Be Quiet Please by Raymond Carver. Now, this book is really interesting because while I was reading it, I was just thinking to myself, I have to know what Raymond Carver looks like. So I looked up what he looks like, and it's kind of what you would think he would look like. But I also was reading about his life, and we weirdly had like very similar lives. So he was born in Oregon, and he died in Port Angeles, Washington. And I have connections to both of those places. My brother lives really near Port Angeles, and my family is from Oregon. But he ends up going to Chico State, dropping out, going to Sacramento State and getting his degree at Sacramento State. That's where I got my bachelor's degree. Then he moves to the Bay Area and goes to San Jose State to get his master's degree in library science. Well, I love Sacramento and moved to the Bay Area and attended San Jose State to get my master's in library science. So just very weird connections to this. And I was doing more research into it, and it turns out that he's like a Sacramento literary icon. Well, I spent 20 plus years in Sacramento. I just had never heard of him. So it's just so funny that I came upon this book. I bought this book in Dublin. And it's just so funny that this book that I actually have a deeper connection to, I would find in Ireland. This is very So anyways, about the story, this is a short story collection. I really struggled with rating this because, to be honest, I wanted to like it more than I did. I kind of struggle with short story collections sometimes because I feel like I should be getting more out of them than I do. And that I just feel like I don't connect with them as well. I liked a lot of the stories. The first one in particular was my favorite, but most of them I just kind of felt meh about. And I think I would have given it a lower rating if I hadn't been able to tell that, like, clearly Raymond Carver is a master at crafting short stories. Like, that's very clear by this collection. It just didn't resonate with me as much. Stories are really full of like melancholy and disillusionment. No one is happy. No one is satisfied. They don't really end very well. And I don't want to, they're not depressing necessarily. They more deal with those like really mundane like disappointments in life. And I mean, I can appreciate that. I really can. One thing I didn't like about it, which I guess is just a sign of the times, is that the main character is always a man and he's always never that great of a person. So that kind of affected how I liked it also. But I did pick up another short story collection of his called Cathedral. And even though I'm giving this kind of a low rating, for me, at least I'm quite generous with my ratings, I still enjoyed reading it and I'm so glad I read it. So the next book that I read that I gave 4 stars to is A Little Princess by Frances Hodgson Burnett. I loved this book. I thought it was such a great children's story. It had like all those elements that really make it successful. It's about a girl named Sarah, and she grows up in India, and her dad, it's just her and her dad decides she needs to get a proper education. So he sends her to London to a boarding school to get this education. She's very wealthy, so while she's there, she's kind of like their most prestigious student. They really show her off to like potential students and families as like, look at who we have going to this school and stuff. And she really is not wanting for anything. But then they get word that her dad dies, and the school immediately makes Sarah a servant in order to pay her debts, whatever debt she has, and to pay off her like living expenses that she incurs while living there. Sarah is very popular at the school because she has like this amazing imagination, and she makes up stories and worlds, and she really shares those with the other students. And she really comes to rely on this like while she's a servant in the attic. And she really just builds up this world to kind of take her out of her current situation. I don't want to spoil the rest of the story, but that's the basic gist of it. I loved how like classic this felt. The language was very accessible, but still had that kind of like old classic feeling. And I just love the emphasis on imagination as well. And I just think it's a great story for children. And like, I really loved it and I really resonated with it as well. But the next book I read that I also gave 4 stars to is The Woman in Black by Susan Hill. This is a ghost haunted house story. It's a novella. It's very short. And I really enjoyed reading this one. It's very creepy. There's just like a creeping sense of dread for the first half of the book, and then it very quickly things pop off after that. The reason I gave it 4 stars, despite really liking it, and I basically read it all in one sitting, is because it resolves itself very quickly, and the ending is, it's just great. It's so creepy. I love it. But there's just not context to it. You get like these little bits of background and context, and I want more. I want to see the woman in black more fleshed out. I want to know more about her. I want to know more about this house that's haunted, about this curse that's kind of alluded to. I just wish there was more. While I did really, really like this one, I just felt like make it a bit longer and give me some more because I want some more. This next book I also gave 4 stars to, and that is Her Body and Other Parties by Carmen Maria Machado. This is a short story collection, touches on women's bodies, relationships, LGBT themes and representation. Stories are often kind of grotesque, surreal, creepy, a bit horror-y. And I just really love this collection. The reason I gave it 4 stars and not 5 is because there is one particular story in here that was almost 100 pages long, which I don't mind that. I don't mind the length at all, but it just grated on me. And I ended up putting this book down and not picking it up for another week because of this story. That was like the one thing I didn't really like about this. Other than that, there are some amazing stories in this. So the first one is called The Husband Stitch, a retelling of The Girl with the Green Ribbon. And if you've read that book as a child, you'll know what I'm talking about. And I loved that one. There was also another story called 8 bites that I really, really enjoyed. And it was about a woman, clearly like a long line of mental illness in her family and eating disorders. And she ends up getting surgery on her stomach to make it smaller so she can eat less. And the weight that she loses ends up coming back to haunt her. And I just thought that was really, really great. And it's just creepy and great. And it's just a great commentary on feminist and social issues. And I 100% recommend this. So the last book that I read that I gave a 4-star rating to was The Ends of the World, Volcanic Apocalypses, Lethal Oceans, and Our Quest to Understand Earth's Past Mass Extinctions by Peter Brannen. This book covers all of the big mass extinctions that we've had on Earth. And it also discusses kind of how like life survived and how Earth rebounded. And it was just so interesting. Peter Brannen talked to so many scientists. He included so many anecdotes, so many stories and examples, and he really illustrated what these different worlds looked like and what the extinctions looked like. And I just thought it was so powerful. He also was incredibly funny, and it's like, how can you be funny about all of life dying? But he made it work, and I just thought he was a really great person to tell these stories. It was his writing style was really accessible, really humorous. I just really loved it. But on the flip side, the reason I gave it 4 stars is because I felt like it was really bogged down by long chapters. I felt myself kind of spacing out towards the middle of the chapters sometimes. I felt like the beginning and ends were really good, but in the middle, he kind of just lost me a little bit, which makes me sad because he's clearly like a really good writer. Well, the science, like I said, was definitely accessible. It was just a lot of it. I know it's a book about science and I feel like I'm like being unfair here, but maybe you'll see what I mean if you read this. It just felt like subjects that might be hard for people to understand. He made it so people could understand them, but then just dragged on about it for a really long time. Also, just this is just something that really bugs me about nonfiction, especially science nonfiction. I wish there were more photos. So as you can see, he has the middle insert of photos and stuff, but there were so many things, so many different animals, so many different rock things that I had to stop and look it up. And that's why it took me quite a long time to read this, because I was constantly pausing while reading to look things up. And I just wish they would include pictures like sprinkled throughout the book so that I could really get an idea of what he's talking about. Because of course I'm going to look up a dinosaur that looks like a pig and is covered in armor. Like, of course I'm going to look that up. But overall, I learned so much from this book. It was quite scary in its renderings of extinction and a planet that's gone crazy and stuff, but it ended on a really hopeful note. And that hopeful note is basically like, even if we go extinct, even if we mess up the planet for ourselves, Earth will go on. It will be okay. Which is, I find comfort in that, knowing that we are just not important enough to fuck up Earth. We just aren't. Moving into my 4.5-star books. These are books I just loved. The first being My Year of Rest and Relaxation by Ottessa Moshfegh. I'm really sorry if I said that wrong. This is about a girl who attempts to sleep for an entire year. And she does that by finding a psychiatrist that will give her a lot of drugs. And she feels like when she awakens from like her self-imposed hibernation, that she'll be a different person. And then she'll be able to continue on living her life in a better way. This is kind of brought on by the death of her family. Both her parents die, and she wasn't necessarily close with her parents. And so she's confused about the grief that she feels for them. And she's just not sure how to handle it. I am a little bit worried about how much I loved and related to this book, because on one hand, I feel like, who doesn't want to sleep for a year? Sometimes, like, I feel like I wish I could have slept through 2020, you know, that would have been great. But also, it really touches on issues of mental illness and drug abuse and stuff like that. It really paints a great picture of what it feels like to lose grip on your life and just let it slip away from you. And I feel like that is something that people can relate to. We might not all put ourselves into a drug-induced hibernation, but like we can all, you know, relate to that feeling. I thought it was incredibly funny. It's a different kind of humor. It's very quirky. But I just couldn't help but laugh at some of the stuff that she gets into. And ultimately I found it a bit sad. Like, this woman just felt like she didn't have the strength to deal with life. There's a lot going on here. And it was so good. And I really loved reading it. And I'm really excited to see what more this author has, because I know she has a lot of other books. But yeah, I really think more people should read this book. It's just fantastic. And also, I am just obsessed with the cover. I think it's so beautiful. So yeah, great book. I recommend. So my next 4.5-star book was The Wailing Woman by Maria Lewis. This book just surprised me at how much I loved it, and I finished it almost a week ago, and I still have not been able to finish thinking about it because it just was so great. This story follows Sadie, who is a banshee in Texas, who is like a cop, and they are supernatural beings that live in this world where supernatural people are kind of hidden. So they live among humans, but humans don't know that they are around supernatural beings. Texas comes from like a line of cops, like his whole family are cops, and Sadie is a banshee who, as a young girl, has her vocal cords cut. It is illegal for a banshee to use her scream. So when she does as a small child, they decide to just cut her cords. Texas tries to save her life while they're children, and that kind of like bonds them in a way, so that when Texas comes back into Sadie's life, they automatically have this like kind of relationship that they can like jumpstart. And then when Sadie saves Texas's life as adults, they then have to go on the run together as this kind of conspiracy about the people who control the supernatural world comes out. And it's just it's just a really great story. This is an urban fantasy, which I had never read before, but I'm like actually really interested in now. So it's just about like everyday life, but with this supernatural element to it. And I really liked that. I loved the characters. I thought Sadie and Texas had such great chemistry. But Sadie also has great chemistry with her family. She has so many sisters and nieces, and I love that aspect of it also. I loved how all the different bits of folklore are really woven into this story. So Irish folklore plays a big part in it because that's where the banshee kind of legend comes from. And I just loved meeting all the different characters. I loved the adventure in this, and I loved the relationship between Sadie and Texas. And yes, the ending killed me. It really did kill me. This book is a part of a series, but it's a standalone, but because the series just covers the entire world, like the entire universe of these characters. So this was a standalone. And then the other books in the series cover different characters. The reason I gave this 4.5 stars is kind of because of that. I had not read the other ones, and I thought I didn't need to because it was a standalone, and I didn't need to, and clearly I really, really enjoyed it. But there were parts of it that I just thought could have done with more explaining, more context. Like I didn't really know what was happening sometimes, and I think that is because it's coming kind of later in the series, and maybe that explanation was in earlier books. I don't know. So that was the only fault I could find with this book. Other than that, it's just fantastic. Absolutely fantastic. So coming into my 5-star reads, which there are quite a lot of, this month I read Daisy Jones and the Six by Taylor Jenkins Reid. I ended up listening to this on audio, and it was a really spur of the moment, like loan from my library. And the audio is just amazing. It's a full cast production. So like each character has its own voice, and it just worked really well together. The book itself is kind of told like a VH1 documentary, like a behind the music, about this band called The Six and their lead singer Daisy Jones, how they come together, how they made music, and ultimately how they fell apart. So I loved that the full cast production was a part of this, because I just felt like it gave it that much more, like, it just felt more genuine. Like it actually felt like a documentary that you would watch about some really crazy band from back in the day. Loved all the interesting stories, all the intersecting like storylines and relationships, how the band interacted with each other, how they interacted with people outside of the band. I just love Daisy Jones as a character in herself. I feel like we've all known a Daisy Jones. She kind of gives me Stevie Nicks vibes, who is like my one true queen. So I really just felt like that was she was such a great character, and she was written so well. Yeah, overall, I loved the audiobook. It was such a great experience. I just kept me riveted. I was listening to it the whole time. I loved it. And I've actually never read anything by Taylor Jenkins Reid, so I think I might pick something up by her next, because I was very, very impressed by this one. So my next 5-star read was Pumpkinheads by Rowell. This is a graphic novel, and it is quite possibly the cutest graphic novel I've ever read. It felt so cozy and autumnal, and it actually just made me so homesick for being at home in this season. Fall, autumn, whatever you want to call it, is my favorite season, and I just feel like it's not done as well here in the UK as it is at home in America. It's about 2 characters, Josie and Deja, and they work at a pumpkin patch, and it's their last night working there for the season and possibly forever. And it's about their adventure through this pumpkin patch, trying to get Josie to talk to the girl that he's liked forever. And it just gave me all the great feels. I loved it so much. I love the characters, I love the humor, I love the art. I wish I had a copy of it here with you to show you, but I read it as an ebook from my library, so don't have that. But basically it just was great, and it made me really want to go home and just like go to a pumpkin patch, take a hayride, and eat all the pumpkin stuff. It just was a great read, and it was a great start to the fall season also. So my next 5-star read was a tearjerker. That is Flowers for Algernon by Daniel Keyes. I can't even like describe how this book made me feel. It's about a man with a very low IQ, and he takes part in an experiment that raises his IQ, and he becomes a genius. But that change in him is not permanent. And so it kind of deals with these big philosophical questions, how ethics play into experiments on people and experiments on people's intelligence. I think it really just got to the basis, like the most basic tenets of humanity. So Charlie, like before he has his, before he takes part in this experiment, he is kind of like the butt of jokes, and people make fun of him, but he doesn't really realize it. And then as he becomes smarter after this experiment, he really comes to see like how people have been treating him, and then like kind of what he does with that information. And it just like, that part just really hurt me, because I feel like we've all dealt with people, that feeling, you know, before, of people like not being nice to us and kind of taking advantage of that. And it's just, I don't know. It was just a sad book. It was just sad, but excellent at the same time. It's told as a series of progress reports that Charlie writes. And at the beginning of the book, he has not taken part in the experiment. And I hope you can see this. You can really like get like a visual for his intelligence level. And then what's really cool is you can see that progress and change throughout the book as the experiment kind of works on his brain. So I thought that was like a really smart way of telling the story, and also like really being inside Charlie's head. It just makes the story like way more heartbreaking. I loved it. I thought it was very thought-provoking. It was very sad, but still a really great read, a really important read. So we are almost finished. I have 2 more 5-star books, and I was kind of torn about which one I liked better out of the 2 of them. So the next one is How to Hide an Empire, A History of the Greater United States by Daniel Immerwahr. I hope I'm saying that right. This is a nonfiction book that deals with, as the title says, the Greater United States. Now, the United States has tried to pretend like they are not an empire, probably because of our own history fighting off an imperial power, but we clearly are. We clearly are. And so this book kind of takes us through the history of how we have attained an empire, and then also how we've gotten rid of our empires. Now that might sound quite weird because we still have an empire, but it's just so interesting. I never thought of it this way. But basically it kind of starts off with the manifest destiny, the physical taking of land. We're talking about all of North America, well, most of North America, also islands. We're talking about Guam, Hawaii, different territories like Alaska and the Philippines. But then also how we were one of the only imperial powers that got rid of our land, unlike Britain and Spain, where people had to fight for their independence. And instead, what we've done is we've kind of created an empire of influence. And we've done this through the creation of military bases and the dissemination of American culture abroad. So this is something that I can really relate to because I live in the UK and I see firsthand how British people can get quite annoyed when there's like an abundance of Americanness around. And it's kind of become a joke now. So yeah, so I can really see how easily that's done. And it's like living abroad is not hard for me because people can relate to me no matter what, because American culture is just everywhere. It's a really interesting like look at, it's a different type of look at American history. It also was extremely brutal and extremely sad, and I learned a lot of things that I did not know. So many atrocities were committed to kind of keep America powerful and influential, and it's just shameful. It really is. Like, I don't know how else to put it. This one has a lot of pictures, and they are sprinkled throughout, like I love, but the pictures, they just break my heart. And it's such an important read. It's such an important read. I read a lot of American history. I read a lot of American nonfiction books in general, because I feel like it is so important to have this big picture of what like my country has been involved in and what they continue to be involved in. It was a great read. I recommend it. It's a heavy read though, so maybe take that into account if you are going to check it out. But saying that, Daniel Immerwahr, he is a great writer, and it was so accessible, and he had this like such dry humor. I feel like it shouldn't be funny, but he did make parts of it very funny. And also it was just interesting in general. Like, not all of it was completely like horrendously sad. Like, he talks about how kind of in the colonial period, while the United States is expanding across North America, there was a food shortage because like our crops were failing because we didn't have, the soil was kind of like running out of nutrition or whatever. And we used to buy this stuff called guano from Peru, which was basically like fossilized bird poop, that it was heavy with like nitrates and stuff, and then they'd like sprinkle that over the fields. But then we found out that there's all these islands like throughout the world's oceans that are just covered in bird poop, and have been for so long that it's become fossilized and turned into guano, and how America has just like snatched those up. And there's even a map of our guano holdings, and it was just like, that is how our empire started, with bird shit. It's just absolutely ridiculous. Anyways, it was a great read. I highly recommend it. I learned a lot. The best book that I read this month, 5 stars, is Silver, Sword, and Stone, The Story of Latin America in 3 Extraordinary Lives. So this book looks at Latin American history through 3 different things. Silver, Sword, and Stone, as the title suggests. Silver stands for exploitation, so not just of silver, but of gold and of labor and of human lives. Sword, violence, and dictatorships, and how that has really taken hold of the region. And Stone, which is religion, and how that has affected the region also. This book was so incredibly interesting. It just takes such a devastating look at Latin American history and how this has shaped that region, and I just couldn't get enough of it. I really couldn't. It also is quite interesting as it weaves like 3 different lives into these different ways of looking at history. So for Silver, we learn about this woman who lives near the mines in Peru, and how she has broken her body searching for tiny little nuggets of silver and gold, how she has lost her husband to these mines, and how her kids grew up in this really physically toxic environment. Then we learn about a man who was expelled from Cuba and sent to the United States, and really fell into violence and crime and drugs, and how that is kind of like a parallel to the story of Latin America. And in Stone, religion, we follow a Jesuit, what are they? They're not priests, but just this man who moves to Bolivia and really gets involved in Bolivian politics, and helping Bolivia become a better place for its indigenous population. I can't state how well this book was done. I learned so much. It was written so well, and it was just devastating. It's just devastating what's been done to these people. So it basically, starting out with Silver, it basically talks about the conquest of the Americas, and how Spain came and literally only cared about gold and silver. And one of the saddest parts was how they talked about the Aztec Empire, which was not, you know, like it's not like the most equal, loving society ever, but just how the Spanish then took their riches and melted them down to become gold to send back to Spain. And it was just like, how much artwork did we lose out on? How much culture did we miss out on because of this greed for precious metals? And it was the same in South America and the Incas and stuff as well. And it just, and also like just the brutality that came with it. And then Sword talks about also like Spain kept most of Latin America as colonies, but the colonies only existed to give Spain what it wanted, and Spain became really rich off these colonies, and the native populations were just brutalized. And then once Spain left, about how Latin America has really struggled with finding government and rulers that don't become dictators and don't unleash violence on their citizens. And then Stone Religion, about how the Catholic Church has such a hold on Latin America, but how that's kind of starting to slip away as people realize that the Catholic Church was, you know, hand in hand with the Spanish conquest. So it's quite an interesting look at Latin America. I find this particularly interesting because last month I read the book America, which is about Spanish North America, and then also I finished How to Hide an Empire. The United States plays a heavy role in this, especially in like more recent historical developments, and I feel like the three of those books really fit together to provide like a really good picture of like the injustice that has been done on this continent and in this region. And it just breaks my heart. Anyways, this was a great story. And for me, it was a great introduction into Latin American history. And I really want to learn more. So I highly recommend this book. This is the best book I read all month. I highly recommend it. That is all that I have for the moment. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. I hope you found some books that you thought were interesting. If you've read any of them or want to read any of them, please let me know in the comments below. I would really appreciate that. And if you have any recommendations for any of the books that I read also, I would love to hear from you on that as well. Anyways, I hope you guys have a great October and read lots of good books.